So, yeah, well, all right, this is going to be a chat vlog, and so let me think of a topic. So, I was just thinking of schooling, and I think it's interesting how we think of like organized training, and I like how societies have schools, right? Like they build institutions and systems that allow for groups of people to come together, and throughout history, even in prehistoric times, even like the Mayans or the Egyptian, like the scribes of ancient Egypt, they would have had ways of training people. They would have had a system to teach people how to read, write, and the system of education. It's back then it was more practical. I guess it was more because I think in ancient times, right, and even in prehistoric times, they probably had a way of organizing younger people to learn how to hunt or how to survive in let's say in a tribe, right, in a sort of, I guess, what I would call a traditional tribe. But even in, let's say, civilizations, so let's say like ancient Egypt or ancient China, they would have had a system to get people to learn how to do, writing and reading, and then being able to transcribe things. And I feel like in today's world, of course, in modern times, we still do train people, but I guess the difference is that most of the reading and writing happens early on, actually. So we learn how to read and write. Like, if you think about it, a 10-year-old is probably, or well, a young person, let's say, is probably has about as much, because of how easy it is for us to use utensils and to write. We have a system of an alphabet and everything, so we know more as young people than a scribe perhaps in ancient Egypt might have known, at an older age. And so we have such an advantage in that regard. But then I think, like, as you learn more you learn more about as you're, let's say as you get, in our schools, I feel like the basics, as long as you learn how to read and write and do math, the basic math, like, that's actually really far. I mean, it used to be that that's all school was. Like, during the 1800s, I think people just went, there was no high school. So really, when you think about it, a lot of what we think of schooling today is just learning sort of the more advanced forms, whether it's, learning how to write, so not just the basics, but then the next step, which is learning beyond arithmetics, so learning how to do sort of the algebra, and then pre-calculus perhaps. But then with the writing, you're learning how to you're learning how to write essays, let's say. You're learning how to express, to use that knowledge to the next level. And that's really what sort of the higher, the secondary and tertiary educational systems attempt to teach that's what their goal is. And sometimes I don't know, I guess sometimes we don't think about it that way. And one thing I will say is that when we have a system where people are learning, where people are learning more about, I'm talking about secondary schools, so where people are learning about how to write essays, how to, the algebra, the more advanced stuff. I think sometimes people forget the purpose of that. And so it makes learning, the schools are a little different, I feel, because you're not learning sort of the basics anymore. You're learning more about the creative aspect, how to utilize it. And so, it's really an opportunity. I wish people would understand why it's structured the way that it is. And the reason why secondary schools and tertiary schools, which would be college, right? Tertiary schools are university systems, why they are the way they are, and why it's so important to be able to express yourself, or to be able to apply the knowledge beyond the basics. The other thing too is, of course, I sometimes wonder though if, some people have proposed that we should change or consider, having a more hands-on approach, or even the idea that, maybe there are different learning styles that might not be suited for, that they prefer, for example, a more, that it be more like the workplace, because when you go to work, they train you and then they just have you do that, right? It's different from school, right? If you've never worked before, like, you might not realize, but usually there's like a 2-week training, and they put you to do something hands-on. And so some people think that, maybe like secondary and tertiary schools should be more like that. And I know that medical schools do that too, but like some people think that maybe there should be more of, it should be more like work, where, and in fact, like labor, it was pretty common actually for young people to be laborers during the 1800s, and during the 1800s and earlier, like throughout history actually. In prehistoric times, younger people would have just immediately been like apprenticed, and so working. So that is a difference, and I think that's different. I just think it's interesting how different the workplace is from the school, from the college, the way that colleges are run, where colleges are they are in sort of in lecture halls, but the workplace has you doing more hands-on immediately, but there's not really that learning. And I feel like, in fact, the other thing too is sort of the other thing that happens in a workplace is how sometimes in the workplace you don't even have like learning, like they don't even teach you. Like, I've been to some places where there's not really that much of a training. They just kind of show you where everything is, and then you just learn as it happens. And that could take, I've had situations where I don't really even know. I've worked in a place for weeks and I still don't know everything, because like there's no real, like, I guess there's no like guidebook. It's not structured. And so I think it's interesting how perhaps that could also be a reflection of how learning happens, and how schooling is so structured, but really in the workplace, a lot of places there is no handbook. There are not even rules. It's kind of just, you kind of just do and figure out as you go along. And sometimes you have to improvise. And then when I think about that, it makes me feel like like it's just a different way of approaching life. And so but overall, I still feel like the secondary and tertiary education, particularly with the algebra and the math and then the writing, I still think it's important, believe it or not. So I still see the value in it because they are there's a value in it because they teach you things that I believe allow you to understand the higher levels of the foundations of our society, whether it's the sciences, technology. That's all built on the secondary and tertiary aspects, which are not often used in the job, in the workplace, which is why I think so many people, they don't trust in it. And yet I do. So what I'm saying is, this video, I'm upholding the secondary and tertiary, which is college, like university. It's actually relevant, even though it doesn't seem like it is, but it is, because they are the foundations of the higher levels of knowledge that runs our society, right? Like you should understand mathematics if you're going to get into banking, or if you're going to be specifically working on that, which I know most people are not, but for the people that are, it's useful to have that, to teach it, which is why I think they teach it. But going back to the workplace, so we see all the different styles. So imagine, some people think, well, maybe schooling should be a little more random, but I think the problem is we'll always need people who can do the advanced mathematics and the advanced writing. And a lot of times the problem with it is that it's not intuitive. So it's not something that people catch on to. Most people are not going to be good writers, and most people are not going to be good mathematicians. So then you might say, well, why is that taught? Because why is it taught to everybody, right? And the reason why is because there are so few people that will actually do it, that in order to find them, like, we have to have kind of a spread out approach. We have to spread the seeds and hope that somebody, whoever takes it up, will be able to do it, and we'll be able to create great things of great value for our society. And so when you look at it like that, because yes, you're right, most people won't like I said, most people, they don't catch on to it even after years of having it. And so if we could only choose people who were good at something, the problem is it's so hard. Like, math and English is harder, and so these skills are not something that could be taught. Like, you can't just grab 10 people and expect all 10 of them to be able to do it. In the same way that at a job, right, you could get 10 people to work at an average job and they would be able to do it, right? Like at a fast food place, let's say. Most humans, even if you're not educated, or even if you don't like schooling, you would probably be able to catch on and do it, right? You could catch like a random 10 people and they can do it, right? But if let's say you catch 10 random people and then expect them to do high math or high English, they probably wouldn't be able to do it. Does that make sense? So that's why the whole random approach that they do in the workplace, it wouldn't work for schools, because if everyone just kind of did whatever they wanted to, we would never be able to find the really talented people. So really, secondary and tertiary education is all about spreading as much knowledge and then hoping that somebody catches on, because it's so hard to find. Like, even within a population of 300 million people, most of them are not going to be great mathematicians and great writers. Isn't that crazy? Like, they're not. That's how small the averages are. And so that's really the investment that a country is making when they choose to invest in writing and mathematics, like in the hopes that the few people will catch on, even if everyone else might not understand why it has to be that way. So the other thing too is that even in like the case where even in the case of, let's say, people who train, right, and they, when they train, it's more of, in the workplace, people are more random and doing things as it happens without regard to it. It's more of a chaotic way of learning. But I think in those cases, those kinds of jobs, and I would say most jobs in our economy probably are like this, they really don't require they don't require that much. It's something that most people will be able to catch on to. But sometimes people don't realize that there are different that not everything is as easy to do or learn as, and some of it is based on doing repetitive stuff, but some of it is based on finding new discoveries. So there's different forms of difficulties too, and so that's why there's a variety of, there's not just one way of doing things. There's not one way of finding. And so even though I guess what I'm saying is that there's a big chasm, a big gap between education and what the workplace need is. And so a lot of people, most people, you work at an average job, right? And you think, oh, well, anybody could do this, or it's not really that hard, so we don't need advanced schooling. But most people aren't research scientists. Most people, they're not applying the jobs that they're doing. Most people are not speech writers. Most people are not sort of creating and influencing the world, entire departments that have a wide effect in our society. And when you think of people in higher power and in high positions, you want someone who has been tested and who is rigorously you want people who care about education and who have invested in themselves. And so what I'm saying is that when you have like a tertiary, an education system, I feel like, and like college, like when you have these higher institutions, they I think sometimes people want to bring more of the workplace ethics, and I don't know, I mean, I guess, like I said, I think the way it is, there's a reason why it is the way it is. And really, a lot of the stuff in the workplace, I would argue that maybe the reason why it's not taught in school to be sort of a good worker is because it's not really needed, because a lot of the skills, that you get 2 weeks training, it's really just about being consistent and doing the same thing over and over again. It's not, it's not overly complicated. And I think societies are purposely made so that people, from the lowest common denominator is, everybody can just do it. And so most things in our society, for example, getting a driver's license or anything really, it's not complicated, right? I think it's purposely like that because they don't want sort of, they don't want, they don't want it to be too complicated because they know that most people, they want the majority of people to be able to do it. And likewise, there are even sectors in our economy where they purposely make things more complicated. Just, I don't know, over-engineer things. That's another thing too. Like, so, I don't know, there's just, there are many different, and the reason why that happens is because, some things are purposely complicated, I guess. Like cars, for example. So, right, like a lot of luxury cars are purposely complicated, and it costs more money, but it makes sense because it distinguishes them, right? It has like unusual features that makes people want to drive a luxury car, let's say. And so that's an example of, it's not, everything is not always easier either. Some sectors of our economy want complexity. So it's always tricky to see how complex or simple you want things to be. But in my view, in terms of our society, we want, I think we want, I think it's, I don't know, I guess, I don't think there will ever be maybe a true, like an ultimate way of having schools, of teaching. Like, because when you think about it, different, like from around the world, even in America, like there's so many ways in which schooling is done. Like, it's not, nobody learns the exact same curriculum everywhere. Every teacher is slightly different, every school system is slightly different. So there is something amazing about that. There is something that makes it so that we are all, there's never gonna be one perfect, or I don't know if there's an ideal. I mean, I'm probably biased towards what I've experienced, because, and so that's what's interesting to me is how, and it's why I think I like teaching what I've learned. And I think it's interesting because when I talk to different people, they often, will tell me about how they did things differently than I did, and yet they're still, engaging and sort of studious